Turn in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 3. Just to catch us all up to speed to where we are, where we've come from, what's kind of going on here in the study of Exodus. We began this study by kind of dipping into Genesis just a little bit and reminding ourselves that in Genesis, we see the beginnings, right? Like God has created everything, including man, and he puts man in this mountaintop garden in Eden where they work, but they also enjoy rest with God, this full fellowship as God walks with man in the cool of the day. But man chooses to be like God rather than to serve God, right? Like that was the choice put in front of them. If you eat the fruit of this tree, God knows that you are going to be like God, knowing good and evil. And there was something in man that went, yeah, I would rather do that than be under God. And so man is exiled from the garden. And in the next 8, 9 chapters of Genesis, man is continually sent further east, away from the garden, away from the presence of God. And at that entrance to the garden, God places an angel and a flaming sword. So man is sent out into the place where there are thorns and thistles, into the desert, as it were. Now, Exodus is in this place in the Scripture to teach us then how God will deal with the sin and the exile of man away from his presence. How can man dwell in fellowship with God again? That's where Exodus comes into play. And the reason that's such an important question is because without that fellowship with God, we have lost something of what it means to be human. We have lost purpose. We have lost meaning. So how can we regain fellowship with God? Well, the answer that Exodus is unveiling for us is that God must redeem sinners out of exile. What Exodus shows us is that God rescues the slaves and he turns them into his sons. So we have in Genesis a couple who were exiled from the Garden of Eden to the place of thorns and brambles. Gardening is now going to be work, right? So every time we go out and we try to grow grass in the state of Florida, we're like, thank you, Adam. There's an angel there. No one can get back in. There's a flaming sword. But now here we are in Exodus chapter 3. And in Exodus chapter 3, we have another mountain. But instead of a garden, it's a desert with bramble. And there is an angelic presence, and there is fire, and there is the voice of God from the fire. But instead of pronouncing exile, this voice is actually inviting Moses to stay. God has seen, and he has heard, and he has remembered his promise to his people, and he is now going to act. He is going to rescue his people, and he's going to make them his sons, and he's going to use Moses to do it. Moses had some questions about this plan, though. So the last couple of weeks, we looked at each of those questions kind of one right after the other. The first was, but Lord, who am I? Right? I mean, I tried this once before and it didn't work. I've been in the desert now for 40 years. I'm now 80. Who am I to be the one to go back? The second question was, okay, well, who are you, right? Because God said it doesn't really matter who you are, Moses, because I am with you. And Moses was like, well, okay, but what did they ask your name? Like, what are you really like? Is that sufficient? Who are you? To which God answers, I am. And I am the God who is. I am real. I am power. I need nothing. Therefore, nothing can stop me from accomplishing my plan. These are really good questions, by the way. The answers to which are critical for our ability to know and to possess true wisdom. Without these answers, who is God and who am I, we cannot truly know wisdom. We cannot truly possess wisdom. That's why Proverbs says the beginning of wisdom is this: fear God. You need to know Him. And that's where we left off last week. So now we pick up in verse number 16. God has answered Moses' questions. Now He's going to give him a little bit more detail about what this plan entails. But the plan itself is kind of going to be secondary to what is unfolding between God and Moses. Moses has to decide now whether it is worth the potential cost to obey and serve the Lord. And there is a great potential cost for Moses, right? Because if he goes back, there is potential physical danger for him. He's a wanted man. At least he had been. But outside of the physical danger, there is also a danger of opening up old wounds and becoming vulnerable again to the people who have already rejected you. I think many of us have had this experience. We've been hurt by somebody did something. And even if there was forgiveness, and it's just a little different. Like, it takes a bit of an effort to go, okay, I'm going to be willing to open up to this person before because I did it once, and I know how that turned out. And I don't want to have to go through that again. I don't want to have to I don't want to have to subject myself to that same kind of emotional turmoil and pain that I've experienced before. And yet, what is God calling Moses to do? Moses, you're going to go. You're going to go back to those people. So God's going to give him his plan. He's going to give it again. And Moses is going to have some objections. Some reasons as to why this is not a great plan. Or maybe it's a great plan, but I'm not the right guy here. And we're going to see Moses really doesn't want to do this. That's what it boils down to. He just doesn't want to do it. And the question for us, I think, this morning is the potential cost of serving God, being His ministers, is it worth it? What kind of answers will God have to these objections? Well, first He gives His plan. So let's look in verse number 16. He says, "Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice." By the way, if you say, it sounds like we've heard that before already, it's because we have, right? God has already said the same thing to Moses. He's reiterating it now, going, okay, like, now that I've answered your questions, here it is again. Okay, I'm going to repeat it to you. There is already a little hint here at the extreme patience of Yahweh. Let me answer your questions, and now let me reiterate. Let's go back over this, right? He knows who we are. He knows how slow and how difficult and how weak we truly are. He says, you're going to go back. And then in verse 18, and you're going to meet with the elders, and they're going to listen to your voice. You and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God. But know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. And after that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. You shall plunder the Egyptians. Now, let's understand the plan, okay? Let's just zoom out for just a second. God's like, I got this plan. Here's what's going to happen. Step number one, you're going to go back to Egypt and talk to the elders, right? The elders were like the leaders of Israel. So it makes logistical sense here. Go talk to these people, get them on board, let them disseminate the information to the rest of the hundreds of thousands of Israelites rather than Moses having to talk to every person individually, right? So it makes good logistical sense. You're going to tell them that Yahweh, the same God who appeared to your fathers, the God who is, he has seen you, he knows what you've been going through, he hears your cries for help, and he is going to set you free just like he promised. And not only is he going to set you free, but he's going to take you somewhere. He isn't just turning you loose to be on your own. He's going to make you his, and he's going to lead you into a land of rest and a land of blessing. Folks, we've said this before, but it's worth saying again that when we talk about the rescue that God brings to a soul, when we talk about salvation, it is not simply God turning us free from something. He is turning us free, but he is also inviting us in. He's bringing us in to be part of his own family. So you're going to tell them what I've told you, and they're going to believe you. Now, that seems like a minor point, but it's not, and you'll see why in just a minute. Okay, that's step one. Step two, now you're going to go to Pharaoh, and you're going to make this request. We need to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to worship Yahweh. Okay, now, this sounds a little problematic to us, doesn't it? Right? Why is this problematic? It's problematic because we already know, by the way the conversation has gone between God and Moses, that this is not just a 3-day journey we're talking about, right? This is permanent release from captivity. This is, we are leaving and never coming back. So why then would God tell Moses to tell Pharaoh that, hey, listen, it's going to be a 3-day journey. We're going to go worship God, right? There's a couple different possibilities here. Number one, the phrase a 3 days journey in ancient Hebrew and in some of the other ancient languages was oftentimes used as an idiom that meant something like, we're going to go on a really long trip. Okay? It's kind of like an indefinite period of time. So it's kind of like when someone comes up to you and says, hey, do you have a second? You know it's not going to be a literal second, right? Chances are you're going to need to pull up a chair and sit for a while. Or it's like when the nurse comes in and says, the doctor will be right with you, right? And that could mean anywhere from like, he's coming right in to sit down and watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy because you're going to be here for a while, okay? It could be something along those lines. If that's the case, then the understanding is that in these this deliberation with Pharaoh, that Pharaoh would have known exactly what this meant. This is not a literal 3-day journey. They're asking to go away. But it's also possible that this is something similar to what happened in chapter 1 with the midwives. You remember how they come to Pharaoh, but they don't really give Pharaoh the whole truth? They're like, oh, yeah, well, you know, the Hebrew women, man, they pop out babies quick. They're like, that's the reason we haven't killed them. We can't even get there in time. And we said then, and it's worth saying again, that this is war. This is Genesis chapter 3:15 playing out in real life. This is the seed of the serpent versus God and his seed. And in war, your enemy does not deserve the truth. War is full of misdirection and ambush. The enemy doesn't have the right to know your plans. You know, Psalm 18:26, we struggle with this idea just a little bit, but Psalm 18:26 says this, with the purified, you show yourself pure, speaking of God. And with the crooked, you make yourself seem tortuous. You know, I think that's something of what's going on here with Pharaoh. Pharaoh would be like, Moses said one thing, the midwife said something, and I'm not getting the truth from anybody. That's tortuous. But the reality is Pharaoh has already chosen his side. Pharaoh then does not deserve to know all of the plans of God. He has made himself an enemy. And then I think there's this. I think the point to the 3-day journey, whether it's the idiomatic phrase or whether it's God withholding some information to Pharaoh that he did not deserve, I think the point shows up in the way that Pharaoh's going to respond. God says in verse number 19, "But I know the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand." Pharaoh was not even willing to allow a 3-day journey to go worship their God as their God had commanded them. And in fact, in chapter 5, verse 2 of Exodus, Pharaoh's going to respond to Moses when he makes this request and say, "Who is Yahweh, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I don't know Yahweh. And moreover, I will not let Israel go." Pharaoh's not going to acknowledge Yahweh or his right to be worshiped by his people. He wants Israel for himself. And so there's this conflict set up between two great names. We sang just a little bit ago that the name of God is undefeated. Well, here's a conflict between the name of Yahweh and the name of Pharaoh. By requesting a 3-day journey then to worship God, God has exposed the severity of Pharaoh toward Israel and his animosity towards Yahweh, which leads us then to step number 3. Step number 3, I'm going to bring judgment on Israel. Pharaoh's going to say no, and in verse number 20, I'm going to stretch out my hand, and I'm going to strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it, and after that, he will let you go. Now, this is a precursor. This is pointing us toward the 10 plagues. And there is a warning here to not stand against Yahweh. He is going to accomplish his plan, his will, his purpose one way or another. He's either going to compel you by his mercy and his grace, or he is going to compel you by his justice. But either way, he will remain undefeated. And that's what he's saying. It's going to take a mighty hand to rescue Israel from Pharaoh. But I am that I am. In other words, there is none mightier than I. Step number 4, I'm going to bring judgment on Egypt, and then I'm going to bless my people. Right? I'm going to give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. You shall not go out empty-handed. You're going to plunder the Egyptians. Plundering is not something we're terribly familiar with, I don't feel like. But it's something that in those days you would have done when you conquered your enemy on the battlefield. You would have taken what their belongings that were left behind. And in some way, that served as provision for the army, which was likely a distance away from their own home, and also would have been kind of payment to them for fighting this battle on the behalf of your country. And so they would plunder. And here in this passage, what stands out is it's not an army that's going to plunder Egypt, it's women. And they're not going to take up swords, and they're not going to fight. They're just going to go ask their neighbors, "Hey, we need some stuff." And the neighbors are going to be like, "Take whatever you want, just get out. We'll give you gold, we'll give you jewelry, we'll give you clothing. Just whatever you want." But God is not just humbling. Don't miss this. God is not just humbling Egypt here and redistributing wealth. This is divine justice and divine provision. God is, in a way, forcing Egypt to pay for the years of Israel's service in slavery to them. Remember, God said, "I saw what they did. I know. I know they made you work without paying you. I know they abused you. And I'm not okay with that." As a matter of fact, later in Deuteronomy chapter 15, God is going to say, when you release slaves from your house, you should give them out of the abundance of your flocks and in your wealth. You should make ample provision for them because you were slaves in Egypt and I redeemed you. In other words, God is like, when I set you free, I didn't just turn you loose. I provided for you. Folks, the wrongs that have been committed against you will not have the final word in your story. Not as long as there is a God who is just. God sees and knows, and his promise to you is that I have not forgotten. God promises peace, and he promises justice. We read that just a little bit ago from John, right? My peace I give to you. My peace I leave with you. And it is unlike peace that the world has to offer. And we need him to grant us that peace, by the way, don't we? Because the justice we're often looking for is sometimes delayed. Justice doesn't always come right away. The balancing of the accounts doesn't always happen on our timetable. We want our pound of flesh, and we want it now. We need his peace. And by the way, when we trust the Lord in his justice, when we trust that he will be the avenger, that frees me to do good to the ones who have misused and abused me. Because I don't have to reconcile the account. That's not my role. I'm free because that's his role. That's his job. Maybe the reason we don't have peace this morning is we're not willing to relinquish our demands for vengeance on someone. We're still seeking the pound of flesh. Because of that, we have no peace. Moses is going to go to the elders of Israel. They're going to believe. He's going to go to Pharaoh. He's not going to believe. And God is going to do wonders. That's going to force Pharaoh's hand. And he's going to provide for Israel. Well, now we should be ready to go, right? What a fantastic plan. What an amazing plan. Look at what God is going to do. And he's going to use Moses. Who wouldn't want to be in Moses' shoes, right? Guy who wouldn't want that front row seat? Let's go do this thing. But Moses has an objection. Moses is still weighing in his head, right? Like, is this? I don't know. And here's the objection that he offers in verse number 4. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. For they're going to say, Yahweh didn't appear to you. In other words, hey, Moses is like, look, God, I've dealt with these people before. I don't know how well you know them, but they're not just going to believe me because I come waltzing back into town with some story about meeting God in a burning bush. That's not going to work. And Moses has something of a point. Moses has no credibility with them, really. I mean, if he goes back, it's been 40 years. It's likely that most of those people don't even know his name anymore. And even the ones who do remember, they're going to remember him as a fugitive murderer. And besides that, they've already rejected him. Remember, they said, who made you a ruler and judge over us? And given enough time in the book of Exodus, we're going to find that Israel is not always going to be willing followers of Moses. Moses has something of a point here. He appears to have a point. But this question is also, in a way, disregarding the answers to both of Moses' previous questions, and it is questioning or doubting a direct word that God has already given him. Right? Who am I? It doesn't matter, Moses, because I am is with you. Well, who are you? I am real. I am sovereign. I can rescue. So by raising this objection, hey, listen, Israel won't listen. Moses, in a way, is looking at himself again and simultaneously doubting the sovereignty of God. God, I don't know, like you say, but I just don't think it's going to happen. Besides that, in verse number 18, God is like, they will listen. Moses is like, probably not. Though Moses had a point about how difficult Israel can be, he is rejecting the very word of the Lord. Folks, and it makes me wonder, I wonder if you've ever decided not to share the gospel with someone because you just didn't think they would listen. You looked at them and you rationalized that, you know what, they're too rich. They're too addicted, they're too old, they're too hard, they're too political, they're too millennial. Like whatever it is, we look at people and we just rationalize, like it's not going to work. I mean, what's the point? So you say nothing. And I wonder if sometimes we hide behind, when we have this conversation about evangelization, the number one reason people give for not sharing the gospel with someone is what? It's fear, right? I'm afraid of how they're going to respond. But I wonder, I was thinking about this week. I wonder if the real issue is not so much fear of how someone is going to respond, but a lack of faith in the power of the gospel to actually do what God has promised to do. In other words, I'm looking at people and I'm making judgments and I'm going, I'm going to share with them, but it's not really going to make a difference, and then I'm going to be left picking up the pieces. I'm going to be left with the embarrassment. I'm going to be left with the rejection. And maybe our fear doesn't come from, man, it's really awkward having conversations with people, but our fear really is flowing out of disbelief. Perhaps then, the issue with evangelization is that we need to confess unbelief along with our fear of man. Well, God is going to show great patience with Moses again, and he's going to give just compelling evidence. Look at verse number 2 of chapter 4. The Lord said to him, "What is in your hand?" He said, "A staff." And he said, "Throw it on the ground." So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. Amen? But the Lord said to Moses, "Put out your hand and catch it by the tail." So he put out his hand, and he kind of snatched it up, and it became a staff in his hand. In verse number 5, God says that they may believe that Yahweh, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. I love this because God doesn't even give, he doesn't give any explanation at all. He's like, "Hey, Moses, what you got in your hand?" Moses is like, "They're not going to believe me." "Hey, Moses, what's that in your hand?" "Well, it's a big stick, God." "Hey, throw that thing on the ground for a minute." And there's what is probably a poisonous snake. And Moses sees it and does what any sane, rational person would do. You run the other way. God didn't say, "Hey, Moses, watch this cool trick, okay? This thing's going to turn into a snake, so hang on for just a second. Throw it way over there so it doesn't startle you too much." He's like, "No, just throw it on the ground and watch this." Why this particular miracle? Why this thing? I think there is a picture here. Remember, this is conflict between the seed of a serpent and the seed of God himself, right? And there is a picture here of God's authority and power over the serpent that he is going to display through Moses. Moses, reach out and grab this serpent. There is a visible illustration of God's authority over Pharaoh. Moses, Pharaoh is nothing. You're going to grab that snake by the tail, and it's going to be like a stick in your hand, right? And then God doesn't give Moses a chance to object or think or ask any questions. He goes right into verse number 6 and says, "And again the Lord said to him, 'Put your hand inside your cloak.' And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. And then God was like, 'Put your hand back inside your cloak.' And he put it in, and when he pulled it out again, it was white and clean again, just like the rest of his flesh. And God says, 'If they will not believe you or listen to the first sign, that they may believe the latter sign,'" right? Here's another one. And again, what's the point of this? It's imagery. It's teaching the people that this God has authority over disease. He can send disease, and he can heal from disease, as simple as this. So what is Israel thinking at this point? Man, God can grab the snake by the tail and do whatever he wants with it. God can bring disease and heal from disease. How can we lose? How can we lose? And then God is like, "Oh, but one more thing. If that doesn't work either, then scoop up some water out of the Nile and pour it on the ground. It's going to turn into blood." God is demonstrating his power. This is kind of anticipating the first plague, right? He's demonstrating his control over nature and maybe even his control over the Egyptian gods. And again, the people are just going to be like, there is no way we can lose with this God on our side. It's not all that dissimilar to Jesus, right? Jesus is healing people. He's feeding people with a few loaves and fishes. And the people are like, this is the guy to lead us against Rome, right? Because if any of us get sick, he can heal us. If we get wounded in battle, he can heal us. We don't have to worry about bringing provisions because he can feed us on the front lines. We don't even have to worry about death because apparently he's raised some people from the dead. So we just be like this just unstoppable army. And what is Rome going to be able to do? And then Jesus is like, no, that's not what I'm about to do right now. You've completely misread the situation. But here in Exodus, God is like, that's exactly what I'm about to do right now. I am about to overthrow Pharaoh in Egypt. And how can you lose? Look around. And I think sometimes we have this idea. We look back at that and we're like, where are those signs today? If God would only... Well, if I were to go to downtown or to, a local bar, and I'm carrying a stick in my hand, and like, God says, repent right now, bam, and there's a snake, I might have people's attention. We might have a lot more people here next Sunday. And it's easy for us to look around and go, well, where are the signs? Where are the proofs? Why doesn't God give that kind of evidence, that kind of compelling proof today? And I would just one thing for you to consider. Where is that kind of proof? Where is that kind of miracle? I would say to you this: look around you. Look around you. You are the sign. You say, where do you get that? Listen to Philippians chapter 1. Paul says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. In other words, your presence here, your unity together as a church body, your love for one another, your commitment to the truth is the sign from God to the unbelieving world that He alone is God, that judgment is real, but salvation is available. Paul puts it this way in Ephesians chapter 3. He's like, so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places. How will the wisdom of God be made known? What will be the evidence? What will be the proof? What will be the sign? It is you, church. And doesn't that take church and just shake up everything we ever thought we knew about it? Church is more than just a place where you come and get your shot in the arm so you can make it through the week. Church is more than just a place where you can come and kind of recharge and feel good. Church is more than a place where you can bring your friends to hear about the gospel so that they might be saved. The church is the sign. It is the gigantic billboard on the edge of the planet that is preaching to the entire universe about the manifold grace of God. That is you, Holiday Bible Church. That takes church from maybe I feel like doing it this week. Maybe I feel like hanging out. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm kind of tired. Whatever. Oh, listen, you got to understand what this is. You are the sign. You are the display. You are the proof that God has the ability to give the miracle of life. Maybe this would be enough for Moses. Got these three amazing signs. Let's go show these off. But not quite. Moses has another objection. Verse number 10, but Moses said to Yahweh, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and of tongue." In other words, I don't have the right skill set here, God. This is not really my thing. I am not a man of words. I'm no wordsmith. I have literally a heavy speech and a heavy tongue. Some of you know what that feels like. You get up to talk to people, it's just tongue-tied and words don't come out right. Or sometimes it's even people have speculated, well, maybe Moses had some sort of a speech impediment. We don't really know. I tend to read this. It sounds more to me like Moses is God, when I say things to people, it just doesn't connect. And some of you, I think, know this too, that you share information with people, and just 9 times out of 10, they're going to take it the wrong way. This is just not my thing. I shouldn't be a spokesperson. It's not my gifting. Some people have speculated that Moses spent 40 years in Pharaoh's court, and part of what he was doing was trying to work on behalf of God's people from the inside. Let me argue for them. Let me try the political route before I just go out and start killing Egyptians. In 40 years in, he's like, that's not working out so well. I got to take a different approach. And so maybe that gives us a little bit of a background. Or Moses is like, I've tried the diplomatic route, God. And vocally, like when I say things, it just doesn't work. Nobody listens. You got the wrong guy, is essentially what Moses is saying. But again, Moses' objections were focused on who? Focused on Moses, aren't they? God's already said, Moses, it's not about you. I'm coming. And so God comes back to that same argument in verse number 11. Yahweh says to him, who's made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. I told you, I'm coming, and I am all you need. God doesn't need the best and the brightest folks. He doesn't need wordsmiths. He doesn't need anyone or anything, but he is looking for willing participants. And when God says, I am coming with you, it obliterates so many of our excuses, doesn't it? I'm too shy. I'm not smart. I'm not good with words. God is like, it doesn't matter. Because it's not about you. I am with you. The level of your talent is irrelevant. You're talking about the God who can bring water out of a rock. I don't think the rock was qualified for that at all. Certainly, he can use us in our small gifts. So now God, the great I am, he's coming with Moses. He's going to see to it that Israel believes the message that Moses is bringing. He's going to ensure that Moses' lack of natural talent doesn't get in the way. Now we're ready, right? Not quite. Moses has another objection. And this time things change just a little bit. Verse number 13, Moses says, oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Like he's out of objections. He's out of excuses. Now his lack of faith is kind of brought to the surface. He's kind of made his decision. He's weighed the possibilities. He's weighed the cost. And he's like, I just don't want to do this. Like God is, and doesn't God have an interesting way of doing this? Doesn't he have a way of exposing what's really the issue in our hearts? Like, I know you have your excuses and I know you have your reasons, but really what it boils down to, you just don't believe. You just don't want to obey sometimes. We would just rather let someone else do the serving rather than us. God has been very patient with Moses. And now, for the first time, God gets angry. And his anger flashes towards Moses. But only for a moment. Verse number 14, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Now, if you're reading this story for the first time, and you read the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Moses, what would you expect to read next? If you're wondering, let me give you some, just check this out for a second. Numbers chapter 11, verse 1. The people complained in the hearing of Yahweh about their misfortunes. And when Yahweh heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of Yahweh burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Okay? Chapter 11, 33. The anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck down the people with a very great plague. Numbers 12, 9. The anger of Yahweh was kindled against Miriam, Moses' sister, and she was turned into a leper. Numbers 22, the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Balaam, and he sent an angel that would have killed him had his donkey not intervened. Listen, God is, as Mike reminded us in the Discovering God Hour last week, God is described as being long-nosed. He's long-nostriled, which means he's very, very patient. His exhale has time to cool off through his long nostrils, right? But when his anger is kindled, it does not go well for people. And so we would expect then, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and Moses was reduced to a pile of ashes, and God found someone else who was more faithful to do the job. And God would have been 100% just to do it. But what actually happens? The anger of the Lord is kindled against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth and with his mouth. and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him, and take in your hand this staff, which you shall do the signs. Right? Stop and consider for just a moment the difference between God's patience and mercy with Moses, who has essentially refused to do God's will, and the severity and the judgment that is coming against Pharaoh, who is also going to refuse to do God's will. And when we make that consideration, I think our minds go forward to Exodus 33 when God has got Moses, and he says, Moses, I'm going to make all my goodness pass before you, and I'm going to proclaim before you my name, Yahweh. I'm going to tell you who I am, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Now listen, I don't want to get in the conversation because we don't have time this morning about how this is possible or what it means for our free will that God chooses some and not others. But what I want you to consider this morning is what it means for those of you who have experienced God's mercy, the ultimate mercy through the sacrifice of his Son. Have you stopped to consider your own unworthiness and that the mercy of God towards you is an unbelievable display of his love for you? Because let's face it, you brought nothing to the table. What did I have to offer? Moses is like, I can't speak. I can't convince Israel. I have no credibility with them. And God is like, but I'm going with you. And Moses is like, but I don't want to do it. And God in his mercy says, oh, you're going. And I'll give you all the help you need. Now, I think Moses lost a little of something here. I don't think this was without consequence. I think there is something to the fact that Moses could have been the one. And now some of that glory is kind of being divided. But even in that, there's going to be an illustration of how God works with his people, because now Moses is going to receive this word from God, and he's going to give that word to Aaron, who's going to function as a priest, which is kind of a foretaste of the role that he's going to play in Israel as the high priest. God is even going to take the stubborn refusal of his people and turn it out for their benefit and turn it for good. Folks, I think at the end of the day, the question we are left with is, who doesn't want to trust a God like this? I don't know what God has put in front of you this morning. I don't know what he's asking of you. But I do know that he's worthy of your trust. His plans for you are good. There's plenty of evidence to be seen. Just look around. He will enable you to do what he called you to do. And his patience is legendary. And that is something we can take great comfort in, can't we? That is something we can take and apply perhaps even to the struggle we're having right now. Can I trust God? Should I move forward? Can I obey him? Can I minister for him? Can I take his gospel to people? Can I share the truth? Can I engage with folks at church on a meaningful spiritual level? I don't know that I can do these things. I don't know that it's worth the cost. I don't know if it's worth the cost of my time or being open and vulnerable with people, because we know how that tends to turn out so often. Is it worth the cost? And folks, there is something in the amazing patience of God that is just shouting at us this morning. It's worth every ounce of effort. Because God just keeps giving what we need at every turn and at every trial and at every opportunity to serve. But do not make the mistake of confusing God's patience for slackness. He is a God of justice, And that is either a great comfort to you this morning, or it is reason for great fear. And the only way to go from fear to comfort is to lean into his offer of mercy. To put our faith in the one who has brought the mercy of God near. Who has paid the way for us to have restored fellowship with our God. The one who gives gifts to his people. Gifts that he has plundered from the enemy. That supply and enable our service to him. Would you turn to Christ and to Christ alone if you have not yet? And Christian, would you count the cost? And would you behold and consider the worthiness of your God to be trusted against the demands that are made of you, that he will in fact supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory. He is with you. Let's bow and let's pray. Lord, we forget this very easily. We forget that you are with us. We don't stop to consider what it means that you are with us. And we can look around at the cost, the potential cost of our service to you, and just decide it's not worth the trouble. It's way easier to stay inside. It's way easier to watch Netflix. It's way easier to go to the gym. And in making those choices, in opposition to obedience, we are missing out on your blessing. The blessing of being used by the God of the universe, who does not need us, yet chooses to use us anyway. Lord, none of this is a call, none of this is a demand to give up everything that we enjoy in life. What this is a call to consider whether we are resisting your request, your demand, your call for our service. And it is exposing our excuses that have no bearing. Lord, may we learn as your people to trust you more. Cause us to be bold, not in our abilities, but in your presence. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yes, Jesus.